Warning: this podcast may be too intense for young children and is not recommended for children under the age of 13. No costume or costumes, masks are allowed on this podcast.
Welcome aboard this week's podcast of Dudes Dish Disney. Get ready for amazing attractions across America. Beer halls and bar rooms, banquets and beverages, a collection of characters and colleagues.
No cupcakes.
It's Dudes Dishing Disney. This episode of Dudes Dish Disney is sponsored by Corner of Maine. If you're a dude or dudette looking to wear Disney style, Corner of Maine is the only answer. And now your hosts, the dudes of Dudes Dish Disney.
Good evening, foolish mortals. I'll be your host, your ghost host this evening. Joining us from his basement is our resident tech dude, Jonathan.
What's going on, guys? I swear there's nothing creepy going on here.
Also joining us, frightfully from the Midwest, he is the number one spooky Disney dude, Ryan.
If you could keep that light in your face forever, that would be fantastic. What's up, dudes?
Welcome to the Dudes Not So Scary Ghost Stories in honor of Halloween. What's up, dudes?
Dear God. Dear God. I knew about the first part, but the second part, god damn. That's more scary than anything I've seen in a long time.
You know what's funny is I tried to get you in a picture in those Mickey Mouse ears once, and you refused to let me put it in public, and here you are doing it live. So I take that as full permission to use those photos moving forward. Thank you, Carl.
Don't worry, Ryan. I've already snapped a million screenshots. Folks will be posting those after the show. Feel free to post them to the world and then some.
Can't wait to Photoshop those into some other pictures. Should be good time.
It should be. Hey, happy Halloween, dudes. We're on the eve of All Hallows Eve.
We're close. My kids have been telling me every day for the last 2 weeks that it's coming. So I'm looking forward to getting it over with because it's supposed to be 57 degrees, windy and rainy here tomorrow night for trick-or-treating. So thank you, Chicago, for 2 great 80-degree days, only to be followed by crappy weather on the day that I want the good weather. Appreciate that so much.
Hey, we'll take that nice weather here. It's supposed to be 70 New England tomorrow, so perfect weather. Perfect weather.
Welcome. I'm passing it your way.
There you go. Yeah, it's good stuff. So, what is it? I was trying to think. There used to be, growing up as a kid, there used to be a name for October 30th, the night before Halloween.
All Hallows Eve.
Well, no, that's really Halloween. But the night before was, I don't know what they called it. Was it Pumpkin Night or something? There was a name for it. Maybe one of our listeners can chime in for it. And that was the night you went out and kind of raised hell a little bit. And then you saved the trick-or-treating for Halloween. And
Mischief Night, Carl.
Yeah.
Was it Mischief Night? It's something
Mischief
like
Night. That. Yeah, Mischief Night or Devil's Night here in the Midwest.
Okay.
Cabbage Night in our neck of the woods.
Cabbage Night. That's what I remember. Cabbage Night.
That's so fitting.
So we thought we would inspire our listeners with a live show tonight, and we thought, there's so many podcasts out there that focus on mystery and ghost stories and the like, that why not combine that with our knowledge of Disney and bring our listeners some real life or maybe fictional or maybe urban legend ghost stories centered around Walt Disney World and Disneyland. And so we've been thinking about this for a long time, and having it be kind of a scary night. And you can't get much scarier than John's basement.
I swear, my basement is really not that scary. It's a disaster, but it's not scary.
It's a little bit of both, my friend. John, move move a little bit so everybody can see the TV behind you.
If we can.
That's my favorite part. Yeah, can we throw the shout out? I think Bob created this, right? Bob Martin.
Yeah. Thank you, Bob Martin. You were reached out to, and you were able to provide this very quickly. Thank you very much for this. This is just great.
If you wonder the types of things that we do in Magic Vacations behind the scenes, that's a perfect example of the type of stuff that we do behind the scenes. So, good times.
Keeping it real. So, so let's jump into it. I thought I would start things off tonight with a ghost story that been around Walt Disney World for a long, long time. I remember it distinctly as a cast member there. And a lot of people think it's been debunked. I don't really know the authenticity of it, but it certainly had a mystique. And if you were a cast member in Adventureland for any time, you all knew of George the Ghost. And it's been around forever. And the premise was that George was an Imagineer that worked on Pirates of the Caribbean in 1973, and he reportedly met a tragic death during the ride's construction. Now, some versions of the tale say that he was crushed by a falling beam. Others say that he fell from some height. No one's really sure, and everyone's tried to go back and find records of this accident, and no one can, mysteriously pull up any authentic records. A lot of people will say, no, it never happened. But George is a spirit that lives in the haunted sections of the Pirates of the Caribbean. When I say haunted sections, it's where the skeletons are and where the fire is and the dungeons and some of those more scary sections of the ride. Now, his figure has been seen on surveillance cameras that are taping. People, as you're working the attraction, closing or opening it, I remember distinctly a cast member who was a lead at the time saying that they always heard unexplained footsteps in the evening when they were closing down or in the morning when they were opening up the attraction. And another ongoing repetition was phone calls would come in to the control room board, which is over where you board in the platform. And they'd pick up the phone to, because usually that was an emergency situation and no one was there on the end of the phone. And so the tradition became with cast members that every morning they would open up the attraction and walk around and say good morning to George. And when they closed it down, they would say good night. And if the leads or openers, anyone did not go through that tradition of saying good morning to George, they were in a rough day for as far as being 101 and malfunctions on the attraction. That was sure thing to get the boat stacked up or a problem going on or some sort of situation where they'd have to evac during the day. And, it caused a lot of stress. I know that the people I talk to, would have some run-ins. We talk about it and they say, oh no, I felt something. I felt a cold blast of air. I'm like, well, the attraction's full of cold blasts of air. It's air conditioning.
It's called air conditioning. Congratulations.
But no, it's not that. It's something different that kind of haunts the halls of Pirates of the Caribbean and George. So that's an old one. And again, they all seem to be centered around some misfortunate death in the park.
Several of them are, but the extra creepy one about the pirates, right, is around the skeletal remains and stuff, because the original Disneyland actually had real skeletons, right? Like that's not a story or a ghost story. They actually use cadaver bones, right? So it kind of lends some credence, and it's like maybe they weren't cadaver bones, right? Maybe that's why nobody can dig up the story. Old Disney was like, hey, guess what? We're gonna toss this dude's bones in the ride and say, hey,
Right.
hidden forever.
Yeah, so it's definitely a thing. I mean, the pirates can be intimidating for young people, anyways, and the seams can be very scary. But the spirit of George, is required. A lot of people say the burning city. It's not, he's not in the skeleton section. He's in the burning city, and that's where the accident was. And they've run into him there, or they felt brushes with him there. That kind of spirit of George. And again, no records, right? So you wonder, was Disney really good at keeping things quiet, or did this not happen at all? Is it a figment of people's imagination, John?
A figment of John's.
Hey, let's leave Figment out of this, because Figment is not meant to be creepy. All right, I know he may seem creepy to some, but it's not creepy. All right, not.
You may want to look over your right shoulder. But I mean, the thing is you can't talk about that, though, right? If you don't want the ride to shut down, you can't talk about not believing about George, because if you talk about it, if you say you don't believe it, that's part of the myth, right? Is that like, if you say we don't believe in George, the ride's going to stop, right? You got to be nice to George, otherwise George is going to mess your day up.
Yeah, and it's true. It's not only cast members; it's park guests who know about it and go in. And there's been stories of them mocking him, and then having a malfunction on the ride. So beware. The next time you take that little drop into the lagoon at Pirates of the Caribbean, pay respect to George.
Bum bum bum. Yeah, I think it's a cool story. I think it's cool that the cast members carry it on, right, through the Good Morning George, Good Night George, right, paying respect and homage to George every day. I think that's a pretty cool part of it. And even if it is like, totally fake, it's just one of those lores that lives around Disney. And I kind of love that.
Yeah, that I think is probably the most well-known one. There's several others that may be less well-known. John, would you like to share one?
Sure. So I've got one very fitting. I'm taking one for my favorite ride in all of Disney with Tower of Terror here. This is one that is said that the Tower of Terror is haunted by a former bellhop that died during his shifts on one of the loading platforms. This guy is known to appear on platform D with flickering lights, freezing in the attraction when members are trying to do final walkthroughs of the day, just kind of go through checks, all that. Kind of very similar to George. In the sense that if you're not giving him the credit, then stuff's going to happen. Again, it's just one of those lores that kind of, I would say, definitely helps the cast members get through the day. And it just plays in with this ride. I mean, it's the Tower of Terror. All the potential hauntings and everything with this ride. Why wouldn't this one not fit? And again, it makes perfect sense when you look at what this ride does and the different lighting effects and everything within the ride. This one just fits. This one just fits so perfectly with this ride. Like, let's be honest here. This is just creepy and cool at the same time. So,
how do you feel talking about it? Right? Does that make your anxiety of the Tower of Terror even worse for you, John, or is that
for me not really, because I'm not a complete firm believer in ghost stories and all that. I mean, if it's there, it's there. But For me, this one, it seems a little far-fetched for the ride being somewhat newer than compared to Pirates and some of the other classic attractions, because there's different safety protocols and stuff like that. I don't foresee this one being completely true and real, but I mean, when you're in line, if you start talking about this and others around you start kind of believing into it, I could see that kind of building up the anticipation, building up the creepiness with the ride. But I don't know. I don't know how I completely feel about this one. I think this one's definitely very made up. So
More terrified of the ghost of Dreamfinder than you are of this ghost. Or that creepy moon at the end of I mean, let's talk about that as creepy.
Okay, I will agree to that. That is a stoner's dream right there. I mean,
that's a stoner's worst nightmare right there. That's like an acid trip gone wrong, pal. Like that's brutal. That's brutal. You know what I've never understood is everybody says the scariest ride in all of Disney is Dinosaur, and I'm sorry, no, it's the end of Figment. That's the scariest ride in all of Disney.
Well, we're not talking about Fear Factor here. We're talking about ghost stories. So.
Oh, right. Yeah, sorry. Let's get back to ghost stories. So I think another one of the famous ghost stories that we have coming out of Disneyland is the monorail ghost. And the monorail ghost is kind of one of those extra creepy stories because, again, it follows the same kind of theme that has been discussed here, where it's an actual person, right? This is a story that they have been able to at least verify, that a 19-year-old in 1966, a 19-year-old, his name was Thomas Guy Cleveland. He was trying to get into grad night at Disneyland. So a lot of our listeners usually listen more towards Disney World. For those who don't know, grad night is an overnight experience that they do at Disneyland every May and every June for graduation, right? So this guy was trying to sneak in the overnight time. And when he tried to sneak in, what he tried to do was he tried to climb a wall and a fence along the monorail track. And he was going to try and climb the monorail and run down the monorail to sneak into the parks. A security guard saw him and warned him to get down, but he didn't listen. And he jumped up on the tracks. And once he got on the tracks, an oncoming monorail hit him and killed him. The ghost story goes that late at night now, when the monorail is going around Disneyland and through Disney California Adventure, that you can see this ominous figure running along the monorail track, and then they'll just disappear, right? So that's the cast members, the monorail drivers or captains, if you will. The monorail captains will say that at night they see this figure. This is not just some lore story. This is people saying we've actually seen this ghost there. And that's something that happened again. It happened in 1966, and here we are, almost an entire Carl's lifetime away from that. And and that still rings true. That still rings true. So it's definitely a creepy story, and I think it carries a little extra creepiness when you know that when he got hit, he was dragged 30 or 40 feet by the monorail. Like, this is gruesome. This is not just like, oh, he got knocked off the tracks and he died on impact. No, he got hit and he got dragged and he got bloodied and he was gonzo.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a pretty rough one.
And they still do have, for years after that, still had grad night. And that was a very common, those periods of nights was when they definitely reported seeing him. They reported seeing them throughout the year, but they always kept eyes open for him on those grad nights and the anniversary. And yeah, they say that they see something there.
And they see him, and it's not only just that they see him in the same spot that he died, in the back of the park, like it's, I don't know how I would do with that if I saw like a spectral figure as I'm rounding the monorail track. I'd probably be like, nope, I'm done. I'm just going to leave it here. I'm going to climb down the emergency ladder. I'm out, right? Like, no, thank you. I'm not into that.
Yeah, I if I was a driver and saw that, I'd be like, what the hell is going on here? Yeah. All right, I'm done. How are you? Someone else cover my shift. I'm done for the night. See you later.
it is very intimidating. You're right, Ryan. There seems to be a common theme. Another one, which really was not pleasant to talk about, just like the Matterhorn, just like the monorail accident. 1974. 18-year-old Deborah Stone, she was a cast member, and she was working at what we all know as the Carousel of Progress, but at that time at Disneyland, it was America Sings. They opened it up in 74 for the bicentennial years, and it's a very complex system, the Carousel of Progress, and the way it was built. And she was in the wrong place at the wrong time, where the walls meet and pivot, where the audience, is moving around the track, but the stages stand still. And she was at the opening scene, which transitions, and again, wrong place in the wrong time. She was crushed between the rotating theater wall and that physical stationary stage. The people who witnessed her demise said it wasn't pleasant. The screams were terrifying, and it's been an issue. Now, what's amazing to me is because it was so dramatic, the attraction, was never closed or done anything. They did some repairs. They made some of the walls on the stages sort of breakaway walls, so they're paper. And if you ever see, because that attraction did move out to Florida, some of the walls there are translucent for the scenes to pop up behind them for lights when people appear in the various rooms, but they used the same fabric and translucence on the actual portions of the stage which are between the scenes too, so that people could be safely, if that were to happen, safe from such a tragedy. She's become now not something that's haunted, but she's become sort of a guardian angel for the other employees, is how the story goes. And when people are somewhere they shouldn't be on the attraction, or not operating it correctly, or maybe missing a step in opening it or closing, they hear her say, "Be careful," or "Watch out," or "Stay away from the walls." So they hear her sort of giving a reminder, a warning to the other cast members. So only a Disney cast member could be polite and looking out for safety in the afterlife.
Yet still scary crap at the same time, right? Like it's like, oh, she's so nice looking out for us, but kind of creepy. like if you wouldn't mind, just let me mind my own business here. That'd be great. Thanks.
No, she's a true cast member. She keeps on, looking out for everyone's well-being. So
does she still only point with like two fingers, or is like she give up on the rules because now she's a ghost?
I haven't met her. I haven't met her apparition. I don't know the answer, Ryan, but I suspect if she's looking out for her fellow cast members, that she's probably following all the rules that were introduced in the 70s in training.
Do they teach that one in like the Legends class or whatever? What do they call that class?
Legends, yeah.
Yeah, Legends class, right? Yeah. Do they teach that one in the Legends class? Like, just so you know, we're teaching you all this history so that even when you die, you're at the pearly gates, you're using two fingers to tell people this way to St. Peter. You know what I mean?
Wow. That's it. That's the way to do it. So there's so many stories to talk about.
Yeah.
John?
There's another one. A few years from your story in 1984, one known as Dolly or Regina Young, she unfortunately was killed on the Matterhorn in Disneyland when she was struck by another oncoming bobsled. Somehow her seatbelt was unbuckled, and we're not sure if it wasn't done properly. She unbuckled herself. Who really knows at this point? But basically, I guess she ended up getting out of her bobsled and got struck by others coming down the track. And nowadays, cast members definitely feel like she's watching them during their walkthrough of the ride. Very similar to kind of some of the other stories here. Kind of making sure that cast members do what they're supposed to and just make sure they follow the safety protocols. In that area of that track is known as Dolly's Dip. So again, it's another one where only Disney cast members would be haunting you with the correct policy, the correct proper way to do something. Anywhere else, you'd be haunted in a much, much worse way. But Disney, make sure you follow the rules.
It's just hilarious because it's like when you look at these ghost stories, it's like these are the stories that somebody fabricated for the full family experience. You know, like, it's like let's make sure that we put this all together so that everybody from grandpa all the way down to the 2-year-old can enjoy it without being too creeped out. They should at least have versions of these stories that, like, during Mickey's Not So Scary Halloween Party, this is the scary part, you know, or Oogie Boogie Bash. That's when they come out and try to get you, you know.
Well, also, I think, you know, the ultimate Disney fan or Disney nerd, you know, they get a portion of the attraction named after them, Dolly's Dip. I mean, like, she lives on as an infamy on that. And she's probably very happy that, you know, she's a portion of the attraction is named after her.
I don't know if I'd want something named after me named Dolly's Dip, but, you know, it's close enough.
Sounds like something out of a Roger Rabbit cartoon.
Yeah, it really does. I'd prefer like Ryan's Rager. I don't know, something. Something.
Speaking of Ryan's Raker.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'll give everybody another one here. This one's a little bit more on the creepy side. I'm not really down with the whole, like, let's play nice to the whole family thing. So this one is like paranormal, super normal. Doesn't really have the same, like, somebody died, right? It's just kind of this, like, urban legend that's been passed around. And this one's called Mr. One Way. So this is super famous in Space Mountain. And actually, it's been told in both Space Mountains on both coasts, but this one's originated in Disneyland. So that's the original. But Mr. One Way was depending on the story that you heard, there's variations. Was a gentleman originally, a redheaded man who was striking up conversations with people in the queue on the way to the ride. And had a conversation, but things just felt like a little off in the conversation. Like Mr. One Way was dressed in like older clothes and didn't seem to be up to date with the most recent changes in the park, and didn't really understand like today's world. It kind of looks like they were from the 70s, even though these stories were happening later. There is another version where this is a child and not a man. But the moral of the story is that Mr. One Way basically walks through the queue, chats you up, gets in the ride next to you, and then you go through the ride and you get off the ride and he's gone, right? And the ghost is gone. And it's somewhere through the exit tunnel. That's when he disappears. And, you know, the original story was somebody had this happen. They questioned it. And they basically went to CCTV cameras and were like, nope, nothing there, right? Like that was all you. What makes this one a little creepier is this story had been going around for a while, and then not long after the stories had been passed around, there was CCTV footage of what appeared to be a shadowy figure coming from the exit side of Space Mountain and sitting down in the car before it left. So that one is like one of those where it's, again, it's this paranormal thing that's happened that was a story, but then there was like maybe some truth to it, some evidence that potentially that happened. And if you believe in capturing those types of things on video and not just like light effects, I mean, I would encourage anybody to go look up the video of it, right? Because it certainly looks like a figure passes through, sits on the cart, and then the car goes, right? There's nothing else moving that makes it seem there's nothing else. I'm laughing because Christy said Mr. Lightning Lane. Mr. Multipass. Yeah, definitely. I think we should create that, Christy. I think we should have a Mr. Lightning Lane. But again, it's one of those, when you see it right on the video, it's like, okay, that kind of lends some credence to this ghost story. And Space Mountain is old. It's going to break your back, but now it's going to break your mind too, apparently.
Well, no. And the other thing about that, Ryan, is that where the story goes and circulated is that, before the internet, the story was kind of out there, and people would hear that story and they'd ask them to repeat it. And it's because, my God, that happened to me the last time I was there. I was there, and this dude came up to me and chatted me up in the line, and he was weird, and no, it wasn't me in the queue. It was some guy from the 70s that looked, out of place and everything.
You sure it just wasn't your doppelganger?
No, this is the thing, is that when people repeated that story, they were like, oh my God, this similar thing happened to me. And people would share that story. So that's kind of what was interesting about it. If you never heard the story before, but then went to Disney World and you heard it, there was a number of people that said, my God, I had a similar thing happen.
Yeah. That one's an extra level of creepy, right? Because it has been passed around, and because so many people have that experience, or again, it's been caught on video to an extent. Like that one bothers me a little bit. I don't ride Space Mountain anymore, so I don't have to deal with Mr. One Way. Although some variations of the story say he does not exist just in Space Mountain, right? That he will find his way to other attractions in the park as well. And so, there is a possibility that if you had that eerie feeling on Seven Dwarfs Mine Train, it could have been Mr. One Way going, I don't know where this ride appeared from since the 70s, but this used to be a lake. I don't know, but still.
I thought it was on 20K. What's going on?
He's trying to swim his way up the mine train.
Amazing, astounding. I was very fond, I still am fond of the Liberty Square area. And one night when I was working merchandise in Fantasyland, I was asked if I could go fill in on Liberty Square. And at the time, it was the Paul Revere silversmith shop. I'm sure it doesn't exist now, but they sold silver jewelry and some, silver-plated items. It was supposed to be, a replica of Paul Revere's shop. And so I wanted to do it just because I thought it'd be cool to get in the colonial garb costume. It was pretty authentic at the time. Right next to Liberty Square was another gift shop, and I don't know if it was necessarily a gift shop or maybe a facade of a shop, but they had an old-fashioned doll sitting in the window, and it wasn't there for a specific reason other than theming. So the story goes that in the old days, to notify the fire department of a bedroom where a child would live, they would prop up a doll. So if there was a fire, and the parents had perished, they could still look, oh, there's the room where the child is, let's rescue the child. And if you look at this building in Liberty Square, it also has a fireman's crest of the time, which is known as the fireman's brigade crest. It's 4 arms, hands interlocked. And that's a signal in the old days. If you had money, you donated to the fire department, because they were all volunteer fire departments, right? There wasn't a government fire department back then. And so if you're rich, you donated money to the cause. So if you had that emblem on your house, it was like, yeah, make sure you save our house and put this fire out because we donated, to the fire department. And it's also the house where they put this doll in Liberty Square. So the issue that reoccurs there is this doll will disappear sometime. And it won't be like it fell down off the windowsill. It'll be gone. And then it'll reappear a couple days later, or it'll appear in a different menu. And it's not cast members messing around because some of the areas where the doll ends up are locked off, secluded areas. For example, in the upstairs window, which is again a facade. And so they're having a hard time keeping track of this doll appearing and unappearing in the various windows at Liberty Square. So this is a reoccurring situation, and it's a mystery that hasn't been solved. And the theory is that there is a ghostly figure who is playing with this doll and deciding when it should appear and where it should appear. Unexplainable. The dolls are creepy anyways.
Dolls are creepy.
Yeah.
I've never quite understood why, but like they do just carry this element of creepiness. Maybe because you can just like rip its head off if you want to, and it's like, whatever, right? No big deal. Like, it's like this sinister thing that happens at a childhood age where it's like, oh, there's this cute little doll. I'm going to rip all its arms off and its head off. And it's like, everybody's got that little bit of evil in them, right? I think that's where it comes from.
It comes from Toy Story, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to say it's...
Yeah, the hooker in Toy Story, right? We can talk about, maybe we can do a show on all the different like little weird innuendos that they put throughout Pixar movies, because there's definitely a few of those too.
A few is an understatement for sure.
Do we have any other individual creepy ghost stories we want to share before we move into the big ones?
What about our guests here on YouTube?
While our guests are coming up with some ideas, why don't we take a moment to salute our sponsor, Ryan?
Sounds like a great idea, Carl.
This episode of Dudes Dish Disney is sponsored by Corner of Maine. If you're a dude or dudette looking to wear Disney style, Corner of Maine is the only answer. Check them out at cornerofmaine.com or on social, #MainStreetDudes.
I think Ryan has more Corner of Maine shirts than anyone I've ever met. So
I have 4.
I would agree to that.
I have 4. I would be totally fine with more of them too. So I'm a big fan. I gotta lose a few LBs and then I can get a few more of them. I'm not trying to buy them all and then have to rebuy them all. So.
All right. Any shares of wisdom from our listeners out there in podcast land? If not, we may have to proceed to the very scary situation surrounding both haunted mansions.
Carl's been waiting all night for this one. There's no doubt about that.
I'm surprised nobody's asked us or brought up in the time that we're waiting here. I'm surprised nobody's brought up Walt himself. Right? There's a lot of stories out there about the ghost of Walt Disney roaming the parks, and going to certain places in the parks and going into break rooms or going into backstage areas that he frequented or liked to frequent, and they would smell this like really distinct smell of cigarette smoke where nobody had been smoking. And obviously for those of us who know the stories, that's basically what killed Walt, right? Is his cigarette habit. And that you can find that smell in certain parts around the park where Walt liked to frequent. And I think that's kind of creepy, right? Like Walt Disney himself haunting his own theme parks, right? Like that's a separate level of creepiness. I don't know how you guys feel about that. I think it's pretty cool.
I'd like to think he was at least for the first 60 years, first of all, it's Disneyland. These stories appear to rather than Disney World, but I'd like to think that he was, a pleasantly happy ghost. Now, I don't know how happy he is, but,
Yeah. Well, Carl, you say that, but part of the legend of, we talked about this at length too, that, they leave the candlelights on, right above the fire station, which is where Walt's apartment was. But part of the legend of that is that wasn't always the case. And it was really kind of started after a cast member tried to turn the apartment lights off before leaving. And then they had returned and the lights were back on again on their own. And like that kind of was like, they took it further. They went back and unplugged like the lamp inside. And then they came back and the lamp was plugged in and on. Right. So like that story in itself, like maybe Walt wasn't as happy as everybody thought he was up there. He was like, this is my park. Right. Don't mess with me. So they kind of had the legend there. I don't know.
Yeah,
John?
I kind of agree. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, this is Walt's baby, and he's definitely not going to sit around and rolling in his grave and not let people know what's what. And I definitely think this is one way he's doing that, is making sure people subtly get the hint if he's happy or not with certain things. I mean, I don't think you're going to see that with everything, but certain classics, I think you're definitely going to see if you mess with the wrong thing, you're going to find out some way or another, I think, that Walt's not happy about it. And I think that's where a lot of the rumors and everything start to fall in line a little bit, is when you start to get these different feelings and distinctions. It seems like someone may be here and I'm not too happy about this. That kind of makes you wonder. It goes, maybe we rethink this a little bit.
Kind of like you when you're not in your basement.
I'm allowed to leave
it yourself,
right?
Photo up behind you.
See, you were talking earlier, John, the other day about the Skyway story, and that was more recent and horrible.
Yeah.
But I didn't realize there was a ghost story attached to it as well.
Yeah. So that one kind of takes place back in the late 90s, 99. For those that probably don't remember, there used to be a Skyway very similar to the gondolas, not as advanced that we have today in the Skyliner, but that would take you over Fantasyland. And basically what it was is a custodian was killed on the Skyway as it unexpectedly started up while he was cleaning it. Disney ultimately was fined a hefty penny for it in violation of safety standards. And then a couple months later, the attraction closed and kind of started to go away. But basically, there's rumors that believe that because of this death and hauntings with involved with it, that there's a reason why we've never seen anything kind of replace some of it. And that there's bits and pieces, if you look close enough, they're still there and why they're still there. So that one's a little creepy when you think of it a little bit, especially because, this one has proof of something happening a little bit here. So I don't know. That one's kind of gets you a little bit. So,
it's amazing to me the amount of, when you dig into this and study, how many times there's a reoccurring theme here, right? But we need to move on to the Haunted Mansion because there's so many stories about both Haunted Mansions, right? And I think the derivative is there's when the Haunted Mansion was built and the air conditioning in Florida specifically, there was so much air conditioning in there that and central air, it cleaned out the Haunted Mansion. And they had to bring in artificial and fake dust and keep adding it to the scenes in the show because the air conditioning would circulate the air and the dust would move around and things would look clean. So they, every once in a while, every week or so, have to sprinkle dust in there. Well, along those lines, some people have taken to the habit early on of being requested that when they pass away, their remains be sprinkled in Disney attractions. And the most common attraction for this to happen was the Haunted Mansion. And of course, there's cameras and everything. They're watching it. But in the beginning years, no one really knew what was happening. And there was plenty of, cremation dust sprinkled around the various Haunted Mansions. Why people decided that, I don't know. I know if you're a fan of an attraction, look at, when I pass, I'd like my remains to be scattered around the Jungle Cruise. I don't want to be cremated, but I want my remains to be scattered around the Jungle Cruise.
How did I know there was going to be a Skipper joke somehow involved in that? That's the real horror here.
Hey, why does the ghost go to the bar, John?
Why?
For the booze.
You asked for that one, John.
Oh, God.
All right, but getting now to the Haunted Mansion. So, picture this. All of these people sprinkling ashes there. And that's resulted in, unlike the other stories we've shared, the ghosts are random people with no correlation. If you go back to, I'll just focus on Disney World. We can jump over to Disneyland at any time too. But it was really in, you talk about Walt not getting to see that. That was his favorite, right? And he wanted to see that happen. It happened years and years. But Disney World had a lot of things going on. Some people say that there was originally a pilot that died in surveying that area, but way before the parks were built. And he was in the neighborhood of where the Haunted Mansion is. And it was that plane crash that ended up with one of the ghosts that are in the Haunted Mansion. Other people have said that there was a tragic night, again at grad night, when there was two young boys who were riding in the dune buggies, and they decided they wanted to see up close the seance circle. And one of them stepped out onto the black track where the dune buggy was, and then walked towards Madame Leota. But there's a gap there of about 15 feet, if you've ever seen it with the lights on them, where the table is and where everybody is, so everything looks like it's floating all over the place. There is no floor. He fell, broke his neck when he fell those 15 feet in the dark and tumbled over. So one death there, but that doesn't account for the dozens and dozens of ghosts that have been appeared there. Have you guys heard some of those stories of those ghosts?
Yeah, there's a ton of stories about a ton of different ghosts in Haunted Mansion, and they all seem to stem back from the spread your ashes around, like you mentioned, Carl. And it's really a shame, right? It's really a shame how many people spread their ashes in there because they just get vacuumed up, right? And it's I don't know. My dad was one of the people actually. Going back to what you said before, he was somebody who was like, "Oh, I'd love to have my ashes spread at Haunted Mansion." I'm like, "You idiot! No, don't do that, right? Because it's just going to wind up in a vacuum cleaner." But yeah, a lot of those urban myths tend to go back to that one. There's some other ones where there's video footage or camera footage that shows some other stuff that again looks kind of creepy. I don't know if you're planning on going into those or not, but
the one that's the scariest in Florida that I'd heard many times is that a woman decided, her boy loved the attraction and he wanted to be cremated and spread there. And so she did it. And in reality, the story goes that he did not. He was terrified of the mansion. And they see this figure of this young boy at the exit crying, screaming, this ghost to get out. Can you imagine being a young boy and being brave enough to go on that and telling your parents you liked it, and that's where you ended up, and the poor soul is traumatized for life being part of
a lesson really fast. Don't lie to your parents, right? Like figure that stuff out. There was another one in Florida where a guy took a picture, and when he took the picture, he hadn't seen anything, but he was just trying to get a picture of the attraction. And when he took the picture and he went back and reviewed it, there was a boy peeking out from around the dune buggy and staring directly at him. And there was no reason for that boy to be staring directly at him otherwise. But again, this is a picture, like, could it have been manufactured? Yes, absolutely. But like, look that picture up if you want to see creepy, because it very clearly is a young boy just staring right at this guy. And he was like, I didn't even see that kid in the queue. I didn't see that kid. And it's only like 3 dune buggies up, right? Like, you would see that person in the queue if that was the case.
Yeah.
That's 6 people in front of you. That's not 50 people in front of you. And he said, as far as he could see getting off the ride, before the ride, as far as 20 or 30 people, he had not seen a little boy. And then there's this boy again, just like, I mean, if you see the photo, it would literally take the boy turning, going out, turning, peeking, and looking all the way behind him, which there would be no reason to do if you were stimulated by everything that's going on around you. That's another one that kind of creeps me out at the Haunted Mansion.
And that story, Ryan, has been repeated and repeated as well. Similar encounters of that boy looking around, being in front and not being seen. It's always in front of someone, that they see him.
Yeah. I don't know. These things make me maybe want to take a break from Disney for a while.
So
that's not going to happen, but they kind of do.
Yeah. So I've got another one moving away from the boy here. One that I don't know how much truth it may have, but apparently there is a rumor that the original spell book that we found in the Haunted Mansion seance room has a ton of real 14th century witchcraft in it. And some believe that these spells are actual real and everything. There's been reports that cast members have trouble keeping the book where it belongs, keeping it upright. And there's rumors that sometimes the book just disappears randomly and then reappears. So this is a little bit creepy when you think of it, especially if there's real witchcraft in here. And I don't know, the wrong hands get to it. You could see some interesting stuff, maybe, if that's what you believe in here. Carl and I are close enough to Salem, Mass. And this time of year, there's a lot of people that really believe this stuff. So I don't know, man. This one could be really, really weird.
Look, Disney is famous for recruiting authentic artifacts to decorate the sets with, right? They've gone to painstaking trips, whether you're, decorating Big Thunder Mountain with relics of the Pioneer West, or whether you're, at Everest expedition with all of the imported things they found all over Asia, right? To be authentic, all of those items. So there's no question that somebody probably got their hands on this book and thought, wow, this would be really cool there, not knowing potentially what it is. So that's another one that's been a reoccurring story there. I thought you were going to talk about the old man with the cane, which is another reoccurring story. And it usually happens to cast members, right? Where someone, if you've ever been backdoored to an attraction, it's when you get on the exit, right? And it's weird if you're on the entrance to an attraction and you're queuing up for a dune buggy, and then someone comes in on a dune buggy. Now, if you're a cast member, you know what that is and what they're coming on. Someone's gotten VIP treatment and they're coming in there. But if you're just a guest observing that, you're like, oh wow, where did they came? They came from around the corner. So in the evenings, when the attraction's about to close, there's been recurring situations where a cast member is on the front load and there's no one coming in through the queue, and then they see a man with a cane coming in from rear load, and they pass right through them in front of the front load, and they'll acknowledge them or say something to them, and then they'll chat later in the day or radio ahead to the back and say, "Oh, you just sent so and so through. What are you talking about? We didn't backdoor any VIPs." And it always seems to be this older man with a cane that appears.
So, Carl, I want to bring to your attention that we are, for those of you watching us live on YouTube, we're also streaming on Facebook and Instagram. Our friend Theme Park Beer is following around on Instagram, Carl. And he wanted to point out that the old man with a cane might be code for Carl walking around the park solo.
At least he mentioned it, and the rest of us were thinking it. So,
Yeah.
Again, I'm there for Theme Park Beer. I'm there for the booze, you know.
He's there for the booze. There we go again. Yeah, there's a lot of recurring ones. There's a really simple one. There's no major backstory to it, but there's a simple one about Roy Disney showing up during Wishes, right, and watching and smiling as Wishes is happening, and then there's other stories like that where, you know, the ghost of Roy or the ghost of Walt will be, you know, walking through the guest or the break room areas, right? There's a lot of those little stories like that people feel like they see it. There's another one that's kind of creepy about a couple of boys who drowned in the rivers of America. That one's a really creepy one, because you're talking about it was like an older brother and a younger brother situation, and they were on Tom Sawyer Island, and they decided to try to jump across and swim back to the main land, if you will. And when they did that, they drowned. And now the rumor is that their ghosts now haunt Tom Sawyer Island. And there's been a lot of people who have said that they see this apparition appear in Tom Sawyer Island that appears to be the older brother of the two. And that's another one that's kind of creepy. So I'm kind of glad they're getting rid of Tom Sawyer Island. How do you feel about that, Carl?
Here's gonna be the creepy. Here's the creepy tale. How triggered does Carl get tonight?
Yeah, right.
In the spirit of the holiday, I will refrain from any discussion on the boys. You know, look at. I mean, again, what a drowning. You know, in an attraction, I just can't imagine what that's like, because most of the waters you can stand up in. You know, they're not that deep. You know, so they could have gotten to the edge. Although, you know, there is certainly some depth to the rivers of America. There's just no shortage, and it's not only the Magic Kingdom. Impressions de France has a reoccurring situation where at the end of the night, when the attraction is being closed, there's a gentleman who's sitting in the theater, and they're trying to close up, and cast members will approach them, and as they get closer, the apparition vanishes, whether it's sitting in a theater seat or it's standing in the back of the theater. And that's been repeatedly documented by cast members throughout the past 40 years. To me, that makes no sense as why there would be someone there experiencing that. You know, the running line about Impressions de France is the film's so old that everybody in it is already dead. So, you know, yeah, they could, you know, is it someone from the movie? Is it Paul Buscos himself who's passed away and was so proud of the restaurant? We don't know. We don't know.
So creepy.
It is. But look, we've been going on. We appreciate our guests listening. Any final ghost stories before we wrap things up this Halloween's Hell Night, Cabbage Night Eve?
Not yet, but I know that, you know, hopefully in a very, very long time from now, there's likely to be a ghost that is finding their way around the World Showcase, one country and one bar at a time, claiming to be the inventor of such an activity. And I'll tell you what, I'll drink with that ghost.
That ghost would be fun to party with and drink with. There's no doubt about that.
Well,
Remember, he's going to tell us where to go and be super nice about it.
well, with that, thank you for all our listeners for joining us. Happy Halloweens, dude.
Happy Halloween, dudes.
Happy Halloween, dudes.
Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of Dudes Dish Disney. Please check us out on social media. On Facebook at Dudes Dish Disney. On Instagram at Dudes Dish Disney. On X at Disney_Dish. Please check us out on YouTube. Like and subscribe at Dudes Dish Disney. This episode of Dudes Dish Disney is sponsored by Corner of Maine. If you're a dude or dudette looking to wear Disney style, Corner of Maine is the only answer. Check them out at cornerofmaine.com or on social #MainStreetDudes.